Hello, my dear students. Today we are going to do a poem Keeping Quiet from the book Flamingo for class 12. This poem is written by Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. Before we move further, let's read something about our poet. Pablo Neruda. It was the pen name and later the legal name of this famous Chilean poet. Why this Chilean poet? Because he was originally from this country, Chile. He was a diplomat and a politician, along with being a poet also. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1971. He wrote in green ink, which was his specialty, which was his personal symbol also for desire and hope. His writings are simple, wherein lies their beauty. Originally written in Spanish, so this poem was originally written in Spanish, which was later translated into English. The essence of this poem is based on introspection and retrospection. The poet feels that some soul searching is needed for us to be at peace with ourselves and others. Let's have a brief introduction to the poem. The poem Keeping Quiet, written by Pablo Neruda, discusses the need of maintaining peace and silence. He stresses upon being quiet and harmless to the human beings, animals, and environment. He suggests that in order to maintain peace and harmony, it is required to stop and introspect ourselves. Let's read the poem and explanation also. The first stanza goes something like this. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. For once, on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. So the poet wants to say that let's begin by counting up to 12. This number 12 can represent the 12 numbers on the clock, the 12 hours of the day, the 12 months of the year, or the 12 zodiac signs. So we will count to 12. That means all the aspects he has taken into count, and we will all keep still. And he urges all the humanity to be still. For once, just for one time, he asks all the human beings on the earth for the betterment of this earth. On the face of this earth means for the sake of this earth, for the betterment of this earth. Let's not speak in any language. And here by speak in any language, the poet wants to say that we should not use any foul language that might harm others, that might hurt others, because we all speak in different languages. We all speak such words sometimes which might harm the feelings and emotions of the listener. So we should not speak in any language. And languages, when they are different, they cause barriers in harmony also. So the poet wants that we all should not speak in such language which might harm others for some time. He says, let us all stop for 1 second. When he wants us to be still for 1 second, he wants us to stop for 1 second and not do anything. And he wants that we should not move our arms so much. So this word arms has been used here for two meanings. One is the arms that we have on our body, our limbs, and the other arms are the weapons. So the poet wants to say that we should not move ourselves so that we might not hurt physically anyone, and we should not use weapons against anyone so that we may not harm anyone physically. So that the meaning of this word arms here is used in two senses. One is that we should not move our body, our arms and hands, to get and hurt others. And other meaning is that we should not use any kind of destructive weapons to harm others. So in the first stanza, the poet wants all of us to count to 12 and be still for the betterment, for the sake of this earth, and not speak in any language, and be still and silent for 1 second and not move our arms and not hurt anyone physically or mentally. Now let's see some literary devices that the poet has used in this first stanza. The first is assonance. Assonance is when there is a repetition of a vowel sound in the lines. Use of vowel sound O and E, like now we will count to 12. It's a repetition of E and O consonant vowel sounds again and again. So that's why the poet has used the literary device of assonance here. Other device that he has used is anaphora. Anaphora is when two consecutive lines starting with the word let's. Here the poet has used let's in our fourth and fifth line in the beginning. So both these lines, let's not speak in any language and let's stop for 1 second, they all begin with the word let's. So that's the use of literary device of anaphora. And he has also used alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of a consonant sound at the start of or two or more closely placed words. Like here, he has used the sound w. We will, right? Here he has used we will in the second as well as in the first line. So he has used three poetic literary devices in the first stanza, that is assonance, anaphora, and alliteration. Coming to our second stanza, the poet wants to say it would be an exotic moment, without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. So it would be an exotic moment. Exotic means unusual. Which moment would be unusual or exotic? When everybody will be silent and still. So poet wants to say here that that moment when everyone would be silent and still, that moment would be exotic. That moment would be unusual. That moment would be without rush. Rush means hurry. That nobody will be in any hurry to go anywhere. We will not be running the race of life without engines. Without engines, engines also represent the hurriedness in our lives, and engines means the vehicles, the machines that we use every day. So there'll be no engines, and so without using the engines, we will not be putting our lives in dangers, we will not be polluting the environment, and we will be saving our lives and environment both together. So he says that that moment when we will not be any rush, that moment will be exotic and wonderful. That moment when there will be no rush, when there will be no hurry, when there will be no engines, no sounds, will be no pollution, we would all be together. We will all be working together in a sudden strangeness. Sudden, why sudden? Because this has never happened earlier. Strangeness, because it is strange. It is that we are all strangers to each other, but even then we are working together. So in a sudden, strange moment, everybody would be working together. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales. So here he wants to say that we when will be silent for a minute, when we will be quiet for a minute, the fisherman in the cold sea, the poor man who is working all his life to make his both ends meet, will have some time to think for himself, and in this way, in this manner, he will be saving the life of other species also, like whales who are just on the verge of extinction. And the man gathering salt, who would look at his hurt hands. Not only that we will be saving others' lives, other species, we would also have time for ourselves. The poor man, the poor people who are all the time working to earn bread for the family would look at his hurt hands, will think about himself, will think about his achievements and the harms that he has done to himself. Again, the poet has used the literary device of alliteration in this stanza also, like we would, w sound is repeated, and sudden strangeness, s sound is repeated here. And in his hurt hands, h sound is repeated again and again. Coming to our third stanza of the poem, the poet wants to say those who prepare green wars. So what is the meaning of green wars here? Green wars here are those wars which provide harm to the nature and destroy the environment. So those who prepare green wars, those people who prepare, who fight such wars which destroy the environment, wars with gas, wars with fire. So such wars which are fought with gas that harms the environment, that pollutes the environment, and wars with fire that destroy the nature and the people. Victory with no survivors. So those people who fight such wars which are destructive for environment, which are destructive for human beings, and such wars which bring victory but leave no people to celebrate them without any survivors, such people who fight such wars, they will put on clean clothes. Here clean clothes are also the symbol of pure thoughts, new approach in life. So the poet wants to say that when we are silent and still, the wars will stop, wars which damage the environment, wars which damage the human beings, wars which are destructive for humanity, wars which bring victory but does not have any survivors to celebrate it. Such wars will be stopped, and those people who prepare, who fight such wars, would put on clean clothes. They will also have new approach to life, a cleaner and purer thought of mind. And they will also walk about with their brothers, because they are always thinking about their enemies. And for a change, they will be with their brothers, spreading brotherhood in the world. And they will walk about with their brothers without the fear of fight, in the shade, doing nothing, because those who are fighters, those who warriors, they are always in the shade. But for a change, when everybody will be quiet, they will be not in the under the sun, they will be under the shade, and they will be doing nothing. Doing nothing here means they will not be doing anything harmful either for the environment or for the humanity. So poet says what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. So the poet wants to say that when he asks all the human beings in the world, all humanity, to be still, he does not mean that there should be total inactivity. It should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. And what is life about? Life is about living. Life is about moving ahead. Life is about progressing. Life goes on, come what may. So we should maybe on the physical plane look inactive, but on the mental plane we are always working. So his words should not be confused with total inactivity. He says that life is what it is about, and life is about moving, so life has to go on. I want no truck with death. So here the word no truck with means association. So he says that his words, no truck with death, that his words should not be associated with death. This stillness, this inactivity should not be confused, should not be associated with stillness of death. Let's see some literary devices that the poet has used in this stanza. Again, the use of alliteration, that is wars, with the repetition of the verse sound, repetition of sk sound here in clean clothes, where c sound is repeated, use of assonance, where a vowel o is repeated again and again, would put on clean clothes and walk about with the brothers. O is repeated, and the use of repetition. Repetition is use of war. So war with green wars, wars with gas, wars with survivor. So he's used the word war again and again. That is the use of this literary device of repetition. The fourth stanza of the poem goes something like this. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, for once could have perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. In this stanza, poet wants to say that if we were not so single-minded, the poet wants to say that we are living our lives single-mindedly, and that single-minded thought is how to keep our lives moving. That all the time we are thinking of this thought only, That is how to keep our lives moving single-mindedly. Only one thought occupies our minds forever. That is how to keep our lives moving. And for once, if we could perhaps, a huge silence might interrupt this sadness. And this single-minded thinking of how to keep our lives moving brings sadness into our lives. But if for once we were not so single-minded, and if for once we could perhaps, a huge silence might interrupt this sadness, that means if for once we are silence, then maybe this huge silence, why this silence is huge? Because it has spread across the world. The whole humanity would be silent. So the whole humanity would be silent. That will create a huge silence. So this huge silence might break, might interrupt this sadness. What sadness? Sadness of never understanding ourselves. That means we ourselves do not know, we ourselves do not understand what we want from our lives. So therefore, if we will be silent and will not be single-mindedly thinking about keeping our lives moving, perhaps this huge silence will break, will interrupt the sadness of never understanding ourselves. Maybe it will alleviate the sadness, the frustration that we bring into our lives ourselves by thinking single-mindedly about one thing only. So this huge silence for once will break this sadness, the frustration from our lives, which we bring in by thinking continuously for one thought, and of threatening ourselves with death. And by thinking one thought all the time, not only we bring sadness and frustration into our lives, but we threaten ourselves with death. And this death does not mean only physical death. This death means the death of the mind, where we kill all our initiatives, where we kill all the innovation and creativity of our mind. So the poet wants to say that maybe a huge silence will be able to interrupt, will be able to break away from this sadness and frustration of never understanding ourselves, which threatens ourselves with death, which kills all the initiative, creativity, and innovation of human mind. The literary devices used in this stanza are alliteration. We were so single, repetition of sound were and sound sir. Enjambment. Enjambment means the continuation of a sentence without a pause beyond the end of a line, couplet, or stanza. So here the poet has used this line continuously without any pause or with beyond the end of the stanza. For once could perhaps a huge silence from here. For once could perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding and of threatening ourselves with death. This is a continuous line where the poet has not taken any pause in between. The last stanza of the poem goes something like this, and this is the most important stanza of the poem also. The poet says, "Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now I'll count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go." In this stanza, the poet has given us a thought, an idea about how can we learn to be silent but still be living at the same time. Poet wants to say that we can learn this from the earth. The earth can teach us. How can the earth teach us? As when everything seems dead. When season of autumn comes, everything seems dead. All the trees become barren, the leaves are shed, and all the nature seems to be dead. But it only seems to be dead. It is not actually dead. But later on, it proves to be alive when the spring season comes. The flowers bloom again when spring is back. So in autumn, everything may seem to be dead, but it is not actually dead. It is living. It is growing. Similarly, we may seem to be still and not talking and moving, but we are alive, just like the earth. It can also be related to the size of the earth, that this huge earth which is revolving around the sun all the time but seems to be still. So we all should be just like earth, seeming to be still but internally moving also. We might not look living, we might not look moving, but we are alive on our mental plane. So the poet says, now I will come to count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go. So this is, the poet wants all humanity to come together and do some soul searching and self introspection, asking ourselves questions like, why are we living, where our lives are leading us, and how this is going to end the frustration in our life. Let's read the summary of the poem. The poet asks humanity to count numbers from 1 to 12, 12 being the number of hours shown in a clock or the number of zodiac signs. He requests everyone not to speak in any bad language, or we should not move such words which might harm others. Such a moment when everyone would be still and silent, that moment will be splendid. That moment will be exotic. The poet says that in this period of inactivity, the fishermen would not harm whales, the sword gatherers will not hurt their hands, and those who are busy destroying the nature will adopt a new approach towards life. The men who are preparing wars and victory based on deaths of innocent people will join their enemies and stand in unity with them, doing nothing. Doing nothing means to harming not everyone, not harming anyone. No one will harm himself or any other person. Everyone will unite and think about his acts and realize the results of his deeds. The poet clarifies his idea and says that he does not want that people should stand idle, that we should not do anything does not mean that we should be idle. He wants that there should be no war because he does not want to see trucks laden with dead bodies of the soldiers. He is promoting universal brotherhood and peace. The poet says that everyone is working continuously, that is to achieve only one goal in life. People are threatened by death, and the fear forces them to work endlessly so that they can achieve everything quickly. In this mad rush, they do not realize the repercussions of the acts. He wants us to pause, stop, and come out of this mad race. He wants us to be happy, happy about our achievements and celebrate them. He wants us to overcome the fear of death and to relax for a while. We should know the results of our deeds and celebrate for our achievements. When the people will remain quiet for a while, they will realize the purpose of their lives. And that is the purpose of this poem also. Just like all the creations of nature undergo a rebirth with the change of seasons, similarly, keeping quiet will be a rebirth for the human soul. It will give a new meaning to our life. Again, the poet says that he will count 12 and asks everyone to remain quiet while he leaves. Thank you for keeping quiet. I hope you understood the poem well.